Hello, indie authors. So, on my personal update, I wanted to tell you that I got a new dog, another one. I I succumb to dog rescue a lot. I'm up to 4 now. So, Radar is his name. He's a mixed Chihuahua and Dachshund. So he's a wee one. My other 3 dogs are large. So that's new. One of my other dogs had surgery this week to remove some lipomas. It's a regular surgery they do often. Nothing scary, but he's not feeling super awesome. So that kind of threw off my schedule a little bit this last week. But that's okay. I did manage to get the first 7,700 words of the newest nonfiction book I'm writing, and that's How to Write a Novel or Memoir. Next week, I am going to be running a discussion group locally to Springfield, Oregon. If you're here, meet me at Willamette Lane Adult Activity Center on Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the lobby, and we'll be talking about how to self-edit your book and some tips for that. What else? Next week, there won't be an episode because I'm going to be driving to Seattle, Washington to go to a friend's art opening. And while I'm there, I'm going to go to the ballet and visit some friends. I haven't been there for 4 years or 5 years or something now, so I'm looking forward to it. My Patreon update, the support of my patrons on Patreon helps make this show and other projects possible. Plus, being a patron of the arts is a totally cool thing to do. Join my Patreon community will get you sneak peeks into my creative world, plus interacting with me directly, and rewards you with exclusive bonus content you can't get anywhere else. For less than a cost of a tasty hot beverage or a pack of gum, you can become a patron of the arts and of me for $1 a month. You can go find me on patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN. Okay, resources. I've made room in my schedule to take on some new editing and coaching clients. So if that is helpful to you, if I can help you with your writing or your publishing project, you can contact me via my website contact form, ValerieIhsanAuthor.com, or you can email me directly, Valerie@ValerieIhsanAuthor.com. Ihsan, IHSAN. Also, I wanted to let you know that the Alliance of Independent Authors is giving a free online writing conference on March 16th, so that's coming up soon. You can register for that at selfpublishingadviceconference.com. It's a really high quality conference, actually. I listened to the videos after the fact. It's a 24-hour conference. They do one speaker every hour on the hour for 24 hours. And of course, I can't go to all of them. And it just so happens I'll be in Seattle for this one, so I won't be able to do it live at all. But if you register, then you can get the playbacks. And the playbacks aren't there all the time, but, excuse me, they are there for a limited time. And so if you register, you'll get the link. You can go and listen to the videos at your leisure until they are removed from the general public. So I highly recommend doing it. They always have good speakers and good topics, and I get inspired every time I attend one of these live online writing conferences hosted by the Alliance of Independent Authors. Okay, the main topic for today is going to be novel writing. specifically characterization and setting and theme. Characterization, premise, and setting. We can talk about theme too if you want. So, first of all, when you're starting a new novel and you're trying to come up with a character, it's got to be a good one, right? Because characters are really important. The main character is really important. And the reason that's true is because people read novels to live vicariously through the character. They read novels to escape. They read novels to figure out what to do in a situation that they are also in, that the character and them share. Maybe they're going through a divorce and the main character is going through a divorce and they just can't fathom how they're going to get from one day to the next with this broken heart. And so they read this novel about a woman that's in the same place and then they know what to do. So there's a lot of reasons why people read fiction, and there's a lot of reasons why you should make your character really awesome. So that's why it's important. And the way to make a character awesome is to make them memorable, unique in some way. They have to be likable. Well, let me amend that. They have to be relatable. So a lot of novels these days have anti-heroes and people that you might not necessarily want to be friends with, but they're relatable in some way, and so they're memorable and unique because of that. So memorable and likable or relatable, they have to be realistic. So not that cardboard cutout, and something that has more facets to them, just like a regular human, not too perfect, and new writers often make the mistake of making your main character being this amazing person, like a superhero, the person that they want to be, the perfect person, thinking that it will make them likable, but that doesn't make them relatable. And if the character is too perfect, then the reader is going to fall out of the story because it's not going to be realistic. So yes, three-dimensional. So how do you find your main character? Sometimes you can journal or daydream, or a character just comes to you. One time I woke up, I was camping, and I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a character talking to me. So I got up and I started taking notes and just writing down what he was saying. So that was one of my characters. You can people watch, you can read news articles, you can, read books and watch movies, and maybe one of the characters on those shows would spark an idea for a character of your own. You can make composite characters. A composite character is where you take people from your life and little bits of them and come up with a new character. For instance, it can be maybe this character has the same annoying tic that your sister does, or laughs like your best friend does, and wears the same bathrobe that your dad did back in the 1980s, and has a smidgen of Dan Aykroyd about him. So you can come up with a character like that. Another thing that I did this for the novel I wrote, The Scent of Apple Tea. I had started and stopped a bunch of novel ideas, and they just never seemed to follow through. So I got really quiet one day. Nobody else was in the house. I got myself a drink, and I got all comfortable, and I sat down on the futon in my bedroom, and I had my journal, and I actually used these fairy oracle decks. Actually, I have it right here. The Fairy Oracle deck by Brian Froud and Jessica Macbeth. And I just drew a card. Well, I got all calm and said, who wants to tell me this story? Who wants to tell me a story? Tell me your story. And so I drew a card, and the card that I drew became the basis of the character, Catherine, in The Scent of Apple Tea. So you can find character ideas, all over the place. Or maybe maybe your story idea didn't start with a character at all. Maybe you have a what if situation. What if a spaceship exploded in space and the people left at home, the survivors, the family of the non-survivors, how do you say that? The people that were survived, the people that died in the accident, what is their story and what would happen and how would you deal with that situation? Or I have another author colleague of mine who writes historical horror fiction, and he takes real people from the past, like the Grim Reaper or whatever, and or serial killers, and kind of tries to figure out what would make a person do this thing. What in their past led them to their present and creating these horrific acts. So he starts with a character too, but he starts with a character that's already in a situation and tries to kind of reverse engineer the characterization of that character. So you can do that too. Something else actually that doesn't deal with premise or characterization or setting, I want to slide in here really quick, and that's about the narrative arcs and there's 3 arcs to the story, and this comes from Bill Kennewer, who also lives in Seattle, actually. So he says that there's 3 arcs to the story. There's a narrative arc, there is a character arc, and there is a story arc. So the narrative arc is how the story is told. The character arc is how the character changes over the course of the story. And the story arc is the plot, like what happens from the beginning to the end of the story. So another way that you can come up with characters is to do a couple of character exercises. And one of my favorites I learned from Kathleen Kerr from Harvest House Publishing in Eugene, Oregon. And she said, she gave us I went to a conference and she was speaking, and the exercise she had us do was she gave us a list of, I don't want to say characteristics, but they're descriptive identity words like pacifist or aging or time traveler, or, so it's a word that is descriptive about a person. And then in another column, you list jobs. And then you just kind of pick and choose from both and pick one from each column. So maybe you'll have, and then you name the character and say where they're from. So maybe you've got an aging janitor, and her name is Gemma Archibald, and she lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and on Monroe Street. And she works in this decrepit but clean theater that is losing sales daily. So you can just start with this little, well, that's not even a premise of a story, but that's just the character. So you can do character exercises and come up with a character that way. And then once you have a character, how do you get to know them? How do you understand their history and what motivates them and what drives them? So you can have your character write a letter to you, the author. You can interview your character and write down what they say. You can have your character tell you a story about something that's important to them. That's really helpful for backstory issues. You could, once you did a character exercise and decided, okay, this person's going to be a janitor, you can research the character's job, or you can research the hometown and find out if there's any cool history that you want to include in the story, or that would impact the character in some way. So those are some ideas. I also want to point out point of view is important when you're writing a book too. You can choose, there's lots of points of view, but the three that I'll just mention briefly are first person, third person, and omniscient. First person is really raw and immediate, and those are good things about using first person, but it's also limiting because you're stuck in I language for one thing. It's always I did this and I did that. And sometimes, well, that's just limiting. You can't really get around using the I word. But it's also limiting in your scenes because if you're writing in first person point of view, you can't put anything else in the scene except what the main character sees or hears. And so the reader will never know anything else than what the main character knows. So if you're writing like a mystery, that might be difficult because you're only going to be in one person's head. And so you're never going to learn any other information other than when the main character knows it. It does help when you're writing in first person if you can put yourself in the shoes of the character, kind of like method acting. So if you're writing about a scene where a mother discovers that her child has died, as a mom, that would be devastating to me, obviously, and I can kind of put myself in that position and imagine what it would be like to have that happen. And I've been sitting in cafes writing before and crying because what's happening to the main character I'm feeling and experiencing too. So that's kind of like a method acting version. If you're writing in third person, the benefit of that is it allows you to write in multiple points of view. So if your story needs to have two different voices, like romances often have the heroine and the hero, both of their voices, in alternating chapters. So that would be a good case for a third person. It is a little bit distant, but you can write third person close, which is basically just writing first person, and you only have the lens of the main character, but you're using the character's first name instead of I. Omniscient point of view isn't done much anymore, and that's kind of like the God narrative, like you can see everything and all the thoughts of all the characters. Or like when you're watching a movie, you see these different scenes and what each character in the movie is feeling because you can see it on their face. And the problem and the reason I don't like omniscient point of view is the head hopping drives me crazy. Authors that do this that I like are, Jane Austen. But that was kind of the norm, 200 years ago, is to write that way. But more contemporarily, Maeve Binchy, she's an Irish author who has passed since, but she wrote that way. I actually had to stop reading her, though, because it did just drive me crazy. So if you are going to write in multiple points of view, you need to do it so that it's not jarring to the reader, meaning each chapter will be its own point of view character. Or if you have to put multiple points of view in one chapter, at least do it in a scene break. Have character A and then scene break, and now character B is thinking. So it's really obvious to the reader that you've shifted heads and points of view. But if you do it in the same paragraph and on the same page, it's just too confusing, and I really don't like it. One author that I've read very recently that I really enjoy is Louise Penny, and she does that omniscient head hopping thing. But but she writes so well that I kind of forgive her for it and read it anyway. Ultimately, you just have to ask, like, how does your story need to be told? And that will indicate which point of view to write in. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about scenes now. And a scene is defined by, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is a character in a place for a specific time, and something happens. So those are kind of the definitions of scenes. And the purpose of a scene is to develop your character, to advance the plot in some way, to introduce conflict or tension. And if you globally, if you look at your whole book as a whole, writing in scene prevents that telling. You have to show, not tell, if you're writing in scene. So writing in scene prevents that summarization that can sometimes happen if you're not concentrating when you're writing. So there are other parts of your manuscript that are not going to be seen. After every scene, there is a sequel, that place where the character kind of regroups and is, reacting, if they haven't already, to what's just happened in the past scene, and thinking about their new options and making a decision. And then once they act on that decision, that kicks you into the next scene. So that in-between scene place is often called sequel, and that, of course, is not a scene, but it's in your manuscript. Or if you're writing setting, more descriptive places where you spend time, like really describing a room or something, that's not scene, it's just description. Exposition, where the character is thinking or mulling something over, often isn't part of a scene. If it's done well, it is in scene. So that, and then also flashbacks. Those are, arguably those are scenes within scenes. But sometimes flashbacks are small enough that they're just a few sentences, and that's pulled, it's not in scene, it's something different. So those are characteristics of a manuscript that don't belong in the scene category. What you want to include in scene is a lot of sensory details, concrete sensory details. Dialogue is in scene. We talked about action or a sense of time moving being in scene. A setting, a location, so that you're not just heads in space talking. And speaking of which, THADs are also in scenes. THADs are talking head avoidance devices. So that would be the phrases, the short sentences that are in between bits of dialogue. So instead of just having dialogue, next paragraph, dialogue, next paragraph, dialogue, there's going to be prose on either side of these people talking that indicate action is being done. So even if it's just getting up and walking across the room or slamming down a coffee cup or something, there's just something else that's going to anchor the reader in the scene so they can see what's going on, and you don't just have these like talking heads in a dark room. Okay, I think that's it for today's show. I don't want to make this too long. It's already at 24 minutes. So join me in my Patreon community, patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN, and come back next week for a new episode, or not next week because I'll be in Seattle, in 2 weeks for another episode of the Indie Author Mentor Show. Leave your comments in the show notes or email me directly, Valerie@ValerieIhsanAuthor.com, IHSAN. Thanks so much for joining me.